The ASUS ROG Ally X for some people is going to be a huge handheld release this year. And for some people, it's just going to be something that you should avoid entirely. If you have been paying attention to the PC handheld space or just PC space in general, you have seen the RMA issues that have popped up due to Gamers Nexus's beautiful work in terms of journalism. Now, I myself have not experienced any issues like that from ASUS in the products that I've used in the past, but that does not mean that other users haven't had that experience themselves. The only time that I ever ran into a problem with an ASUS product that I've had that I purchased with my own money was a Zephyrus G15 that I bought in 2022 that had a dead pixel on it, and they replaced the panel without any issue at all. I will say though, that just because I had a decent experience does not mean that other people have not had a decent experience. And as a content creator, I'm essentially trying to create the best content possible with the most information as possible so that you guys can make an educated decision in making the right purchase for yourself. Right now, no matter what, I would recommend that you wait for the pre-order window to go off for this thing to actually go on sale and for people to be able to go ahead and make reviews on these units to see if we can actually recommend this wholeheartedly or not. Regardless of whether you support ASUS or MSI or any of the other handheld manufacturers that are out there, you should always do your due diligence in terms of finding out anything and everything about a product before you make a purchase for yourself. Obviously, that's what content creators are for the most part. We're here to do the research for you so that it's a little bit easier for you to do the buying, to do the purchase without being worried about things. But regardless of that, you should also do a little bit of research in the company itself and see whether or not people have been having issues with this. This is why the phenomenal journalism that Gamers Nexus did on the ASUS RMA situation is something that you should take into account with all of this. But that being said, I do have to forewarn you, I have to give you a heads up that ASUS did pay for my plane ticket to fly here. I'm currently in Taipei, Taiwan. If you follow the channel, you know that this is not my usual setup. I'm actually recording in a hotel room, which ASUS also decided to go ahead and pay for as well. Now, that being said and done, everything else that I buy or do here is on my own dime, but it's still something that I feel I should go ahead and let you know regardless. When it comes to the handheld itself, when I first got my hands on the ASUS ROG Ally X, the first thing that popped in was how beautifully similar it was in weight in contrast to the original Ally. See, the Ally, I mean, it felt great, it was fine, but when they announced that the Ally X was going to be double the size in terms of battery, I was like, oh my God, that's gonna make it double the weight because you're talking about double everything. But the way that the engineers made it work is that they decided to put the battery on the bottom, put the RAM in front in between the motherboard and the panel itself, and then decrease the size of the fans in order to compensate for that, but add more fins to the fans so that it could still remain cool enough and very similar to the original fins that are there, or the original fans, and also have that 20 dB for an average play session in terms of performance mode. Now, with all that said, I do have to tell you that when I did actually start playing on that handheld while I was at ASUS HQ, it felt very even in terms of weight distribution. And this could be because of the internals and the way that it's set up and the overall feel of things, because that battery being on the bottom, just completely all the way there, it just feels really nice and very weighty in your hands. And then everything else just feels very ergonomic, which is something that I'll talk about later on in the video. But when it came to the face buttons and everything that was there, the actual analog sticks, they're potentiometer, but it's very interesting because you can actually remove the thumbstick that's there and actually just print out your own, screw it on, and be able to use that on your ROG Ally X instead of whatever's there, which allows for a lot of creativity with a lot of users. If you wanted to go ahead and set things up, if you wanted to, it's there, but obviously it's up to you and how you want to go ahead and use it. Another thing that I want to go ahead and mention is that the D-pad, although it is different than the original, the internals are exactly the same. The D-pad, it felt fine, though the pivot that was there in the center wasn't as pronounced as it was on the original Ally, so I kind of want to try it out. The only game that I actually got a chance to play was Tekken 8, and while I was playing there, it felt okay, it felt fine, but I wanted to spend more time with other titles, especially 2D titles like Celeste or Hollow Knight, and try out that D-pad and see whether or not it actually feels well to use in those specific situations, 2D titles. In terms of fighting, it felt fine, but again, I want to try it out and test it out even more. The command center, the Armoury Crate buttons, they're exactly the same. Same with the options and chair button. Like it's exactly the same. And then with the face buttons, they're actually a little bit more pronounced than they were on the Ally. And I want to get my 2 units, and I kind of want to check them out and see whether it is. I haven't gotten the Ally X yet, but when I do get it, I want to go ahead and compare and contrast to see how it really feels. But while I was there, I was able to go ahead and feel the actual face buttons, press them down, and it felt like it was more structurally sound, if that makes sense. Like with the Ally, you can just kind of mesh around the button once it's there, but with the Ally X, once you push it down, it doesn't move, which is very interesting. I kind of want to go ahead and test that out and see whether or not that's actually true with a production unit. Also, when it comes to the shoulder buttons, they're a little squishier than I thought they were going to be. See, the Ally, it's very similar to the Switch in the sense that you just push it down, boom. There is like very little movement in terms of things. There's a little bit on the Ally in contrast to the Joy-Cons, but I digress. When it comes to the actual Ally X, when you push down the shoulder button, it feels like there's a little bit of mush. It's kind of similar to the DualSense shoulder buttons, if that makes sense. So there's a little bit of a push, there's a little bit of a mush, but not a lot, not enough to actually say, you know, hey, this is going to be huge in terms of things. The triggers, they feel very similar to the original one, but they are more curved. And if you follow the channel, I love curves. Ergonomically, curves are just better overall. I don't like angular natures by any means. Curves are just better. You have that curved nature that's there, and that feels great. And now we can kind of talk a little bit more about the ergonomics that are there, because there's a grip that is just so nice. It's kind of like they had the Ally and they kind of wanted to let that grow a little bit more at the curves, and they're closer to what we find on the Steam Deck. So it's not exactly 100% there, but it still feels more comfortable and more ergonomic than I thought it was going to feel, which is nice in the grand scheme of things. On the top, in terms of I/O, you have a USB 4.0, which is great for connecting eGPUs. So there's eGPU support instead of the X Mobile proprietary thing that was on the original Ally. That was one of the things that I don't like. I don't like things that are proprietary. I like things that are customizable and usable across multiple platforms and multiple companies. Now, the second USB port that's there is the Type-C, and it's 3.2. Next to that is actually a volume rocker, and I wish that the actual USB ports, both of them, were swapped with the volume rocker, because when it comes to a volume rocker, I want to be able to reach that without having to overextend or move my grip too much while using my handheld. It's a handheld after all. Now, obviously, the counter argument to that is that, well, just go ahead and use the command center and use the volume up slider that's there and you'll be fine, which is true. That is true, but why put a volume rocker onto the handle itself if that's going to be the main way of interacting with increasing or decreasing the volume? It's a little minor gripe of mine, but you know, it is what it is. Now, there are going to be 3 different fan slots that are there, or exhaust vents. So you have 2 that are originally there, the same ones that we saw on the original Ally, then there's going to be an extra one that's in the middle. And this is the cool thing about everything that I saw for the actual thermals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But after that, you also have the power button that is also a fingerprint sensor, which works just like it normally would. It works just like the original one, and frankly, it does a pretty good job. There's also LED indicators in terms of like whether or not the unit is on and whether or not it's charging as well. On the back side, you are going to have macro keys. Now, these macro keys, they're not as big as they were on the original Ally, and they're actually a little bit more towards the center, so you're not going to accidentally push them whenever you're gaming, which I did quite a lot. So much so that I just didn't have them mapped to anything because I didn't want to accidentally, alt-tab out of a game if I was playing, and I just kind of wanted them to just be there, and I didn't even use them that much. But with this, it's just within reach. So you have your grip, and if you want to go ahead and push in, you can go ahead and use that macro key without having to worry about accidentally pushing it while you're gaming, which is, in my opinion, relatively nice. I do want to also mention that the grips, they kind of have, they're very grippy, if that makes sense. Like, they're rough, but they're not super rough, so you can still have that grip and still feel comfortable while using that. Now, the screen itself is still that 7-inch 1080p 120 hertz variable refresh rate screen that we saw on the original Ally, and I'm okay with it. I wish it was OLED, obviously, but it's a nice to have, but so I understand why they went that route, but it is what it is. When it comes to the rest of the specs that are there, it's going to come with a 1 terabyte M.2 2280 SSD, and this is great because you're able to find these relatively inexpensive, especially when you compare it to the 2230 counterparts. It's also going to come with 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5 memory, clocked at 7500 megahertz, and then the 80-watt battery. Guys, this is absolutely awesome. I love that it is double the size because it's just going to perform so much better and this could potentially make it the longest lasting Windows PC handheld to date. When it comes to Armoury Crate, I didn't really get too much time to really test everything out, but you can tell that they have overhauled a few things in order to provide a more console-like experience on the handheld itself, which is very similar to what we've seen on other handhelds. They're trying to create this console-like experience in order for gamers to just get into the games that they want to play and just move on from there. One of the things that they did show in the software itself was that there was this almost semi-sleep functionality that is only available when you have it plugged in. Essentially, it turns off all of the functions that are there, all of the inputs that are there, all the entire screen, but still leaves the Wi-Fi functionality. So if you're downloading something, you could just go ahead and download it and you don't have to worry about anything, but it does need to be plugged in order for that to work. The cool thing about that is that if you actually go ahead and use it, then, you kind of don't have to worry about anything. It just goes ahead and just, turns on whenever you're ready to play your game. But even when I was testing turning it off or putting it to sleep and turning it back on, it was relatively fast. Obviously, the Windows sign-in page was there and you have to go ahead and sign in, but aside from that, it ran very quickly and I didn't really have to worry too much about things. Even when I had the game running, Tekken 8, in the background, I just go ahead and turn it off and turn it back on. Everything ran as well as it should. Now, obviously, all of these insights, all these impressions that I've had are, in a short window. I went to the headquarters and I checked stuff out and it looked great, but I still wanted to go ahead and kind of share my thoughts on it. Now, is this something that I would recommend pre-ordering? Probably not. I would probably hold back on it. I don't think that that's something that you need to go ahead and do right now. I will go ahead and say that you should probably wait for reviewers to go ahead and get their hands on it. Now, obviously, there are a lot of things that I want to talk about in this preview video that I cannot share, but I will be able to talk about after the embargo is lifted. And obviously, if there are any questions or anything that you want me to go ahead and answer in my final review video, then leave them in the comments below because I'd love to be able to go ahead and provide information that you might be asking for if you're interested in getting this handheld for yourself. That being said, if you're interested in getting the original ROG Ally, then you can hear my long-term review over here. But if you're interested in hearing how that compares to all of the other handhelds that are out there, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.